Alright, so let's now finally use NPM for the first time. And remember, NPM stands for Node Package Manager, and it's both a software on our computer and a package repository. Now, before we jump straight into NPM, let's start by understanding why we actually need something like NPM. So why do we actually need a way of managing packages or dependencies in our project? Well, back in the day, before we had NPM, we used to include external libraries right into our HTML. So basically using the script tag. And this would then expose a global variable that we could use. And actually, that's exactly what we did earlier in our mapty project. So let's actually use or open that here. So mapty and just the index.html file. And so here it is. And you see that indeed we simply included the leaflet.js file basically using a script tag and did that before our own script, so that our own script could then use the global variable that was exposed by this library here, right? Remember that? Now this actually creates a couple of problems, at least in a big project. So maybe not in this particular project that is really small, but in a huge project, in a huge team, this is just not manageable. First, it doesn't make much sense having the HTML loading all our JavaScript. That is just really messy. Also, many times we would actually download a library file to our computer directly. For example, a jQuery JavaScript file. But then, whenever a new version would come out, we would have to manually go to the site, download the new version, change the file in our file system manually, and then include it here again, maybe with some other name, with some other version number. And that was just a huge pain, believe me. And the third reason is that before NPM, there simply wasn't a single repository that contained all the packages that we might need. And so this made it even worse and more difficult to manually download libraries and manage them on our computers. So in summary, this all used to be a huge pain and a huge mess. And maybe you even remember this yourself, like the old days of jQuery and dozens of jQuery plugins that you would have to keep updated. But anyway, all of this is just to say that we really need a way to manage our dependencies in a better and more modern way. And NPM is exactly how we do that. And so let's start by using the NPM software now. All right. So actually we will need this terminal now. So let me clear it. And we start by checking if we actually have NPM installed. So to do that, just type npm-v. So this will check for the version. And if you get any number here, and it doesn't matter which one, then you're good. Well, in fact, it should actually be greater than 6. Okay, so anything that you have greater than 6 is good. But if you did get an error because you didn't install Node.js in one of the previous sections, then please go to this website now, so nodejs.org, and then download and install the version for your computer. So you can just use this LTS version. You don't have to go with the current one. And by the time you're watching this, LTS is probably already at 14 or 16 or 18, who knows, but that doesn't matter. So all that matters is that you install Node.js, and then as you run this command, you just need to get some number here, and then you're good to go. Now, in each project in which we want to use NPM, we need to start by initializing it. And so for that, we write npm init, and this will then ask us a couple of questions in order to create a package.json file. So the questions are down here. So first the package name, and if we just hit enter, then whatever is here in these parentheses will be the default. And so for now we are just good with all of these defaults. So just keep pressing enter, and of course you could define things like the author, keywords, or whatever, but that doesn't really matter for now. So is this okay? Yes, it is. And then we end up with a special file called package.json, which is this one. So this is the file that NPM just created for our project here. Now this file here is basically what stores the entire configuration of our project. So as you see, it's stuff like the project name itself, the version that we can keep on updating, and the author and all kinds of stuff. So for now, that's not really interesting, but it will be in a second. Okay, let's just close these files we don't need. This can become smaller, and let's also clear it. Okay, and now let's actually install the leaflet library that we used before, but this time using NPM. So let's just search for the documentation page again. And so here I already showed it to you before, but let's take a look at it again. So here, using a JavaScript package manager, all we have to do is indeed npm install leaflet. And so this is how it will always work. So you write npm to run the npm program, then install, and then the name of the package. So leaflet like this, and then it will start downloading, and that's it. Now that way of installing it, so this one here was the long version, but we can also write just npm I and then leaflet, like this. So that's going to be the same thing. And now you see that two things happened. So first of all, in our package.json file, a new field here was created for the dependencies. And the dependency that we have here now is leaflet that we just installed at version 1.6.0. Okay? And more about why this is important a little bit later again. But for now, let's take a look at the second thing that happened, which is that we now have this folder called node modules. And this folder itself contains the leaflet folder, as you see here. All right. And so this is the code of this library. And here is some more code, but that is not really important. So you can take a look at it and you will see that it is like, 15,000 lines of code or something. And so this is not a small library by any means. Okay. And so, this folder contains everything about this library that we need to include in our page. And so, this folder simply contains everything about this package. And of course, the more packages we install, they will all get stored into the node modules folder. Okay. So we installed our leaflet library now, but if we wanted to use it, that wouldn't be easy without a module bundler. And that's because this library actually uses the CommonJS module system. So for the reasons that I explained to you before. And so therefore, we cannot directly import it into our code. We could only do that if later we used a module bundler. But for now, we are not doing that. And so let's just not use leaflet for now. So this was just to show you how to install it. So instead, let me show you how we can install and import one of the most popular JavaScript libraries, which is Lodash. So Lodash like this. And Lodash is essentially a collection of a ton of useful functions for arrays, objects, functions, dates, and more. So it's a lot of like functions that could or should be included in JavaScript, but are not. And so people simply implemented them in Lodash, and so now we can use them. So down here we have the installation, and here you see again the old way of doing it as I explained it before. So that would be downloading it and then including it manually. Then here we have the NPM way, but there also should be something else here I'm looking for. But here is how we actually install it using NPM. So as always, NPM install and then Lodash. However, I'm not looking for just the normal Lodash version, because once again, that one actually uses CommonJS. And so we can't use CommonJS modules without a module bundler. And so I'm looking for a special version. And that one is called Lodash ES. And so ES is because of ES modules. All right. So here we say npm I for install, and then Lodash dash ES. Then wait for it, and here it is in our dependencies. Let's take a look at it here as well. So here is Lodash. And so here we now basically have one file for each of the methods that are available in Lodash. And you see, it is a lot of them. Okay. And the one that I want to include now is the one for cloning objects. So that's called clonedeep.js. And so let's simply import it exactly like we used to do it. So import, and now let's check it out again, just to show you what the file looks like and how we can import it. So clone deep. So what matters here is that this uses export default clone deep. Okay, so it's a default export, and so we could give it any name that we want, but I will still just call it clone deep. And then, of course, from, and then the path. So node modules Lodash-ES, and thankfully VS Code is very helpful by showing us the path. Okay, let's see. And we get no errors here, which is already a good sign. Now, why did I actually include clone deep and not something else? Well, it's because I actually already mentioned Lodash before when we talked about copying objects. So remember that it's very hard to copy a nested object. So let's quickly create one here, because I think that this is pretty interesting. So let's say we have some card in here, and this itself is an array which itself contains some objects. So product, bread, and then quantity, let's say 5, and then pizza, let's say 5 again. And then we have a user which also has some object, let's say logged in true. So this is a deeply nested object, right? And so let's see what happens when we copy it using JavaScript. So state clone, and remember we use object.assign to create a copy of an object. And so we create an empty object, and then we basically merge that with the state. So let's take a look at the state clone. And so indeed, it looks exactly the same as the state, right? However, watch what happens when we change one of the nested objects in there. So when we now say state.user.loggedIn and set it to false, then see what happens to the logged in the copy. So you see that it is also false. And so that's for all the reasons that we already learned before. And so remember that back then I said that using Lodash would probably be a good idea instead of using object.assign. Because if we wanted to manually create a deep copy or a deep clone, well, that would be a lot of work. And so instead, we can simply use this function that Lodash gives us, so that some people already implemented for us, and which is also battle tested already. So clone deep state, and so watch what happens with this one. So again, this one here is the state clone, which of course now changed the logged into false. But this one, it's also false, but the reason for that is that we copied the object after we changed it. So that's just wrong, but now it should work. So again, this one changed to false, but this one now is still true, even though we changed it in the original object. Okay, and so this is a good solution for a deep clone that we just got from NPM. And that's great, right? So we just used a piece of open source software to solve a problem that we have sometimes in JavaScript. Great, that's just awesome. So again, you're now one step closer to working like a real JavaScript developer, because this is just what everyone does all the time. So this is the function that does the work, but actually it is this one here. But, well, let's not inspect it. But of course you can have some fun and take a look at how they implemented this. Okay? But I actually want to go back to this package.json file because it is actually very important. So let's say that you want to move your project to another computer, or also share it with another developer, or even check it into version control like Git. Now, in all of these scenarios, you should never ever include the node modules folder. So again, when you copy your project to somewhere else, there is no reason to include this huge node modules folder. Because in a real project, it will actually be really, really huge. So I have had folders here with tens of thousands of files. And so that will just slow you down, and it doesn't make much sense either. Because all of these files, they are already at NPM. And so you can always get them back from there. But now you might ask, well, if I copy my project without the node modules folder, so without the dependencies, will I have to install all of them one by one? What if I have 20 or 200 dependencies? Well, that's again where this important package.json file comes into play. So let's actually simulate that by deleting this folder. So move to trash. And so now, of course, this does not work anymore. But there is fortunately a very easy way to get it back. All we have to do is npm and then install, or I, but just without any package name. And so then npm will reach into your package.json file, look at all the dependencies, and install them back. And so you see that our folder, well, it should be back. And yeah, so here it is, just like before. Okay, and so with this, you now have a basic, but I think good understanding of how to work with NPM, downloading packages, and also include them in your code. However, importing packages like we did here, for example, by specifying this entire path, is not practical at all. And so in the next video, it's time to finally use Parcel to fix this.